The art of teaching mathematics is often about logic and problem solving. Modern board games support these goals by allowing students to develop these skills in a non-traditional format. Today's episode on mathematics, we are factoring in these major mathematics ideas rather than specific mathematics curriculum. Hopefully, today's episode will be a success.
So instead of a game that teaches patterning specifically, we're looking at games that derive their mechanisms from spatial reasoning, critical analysis, and statistical probability.
However, games that are going to be integrated into the classroom have to be both interesting, engaging, and easy to learn. Fortunately, there are many of these.
Quick, before they triangulate our position.
Welcome to Two Geeks in a Game, the Mathematics Edition. Today we are going to be talking about our top 3 games for board games to be used in the math classroom. And instead of looking at specific curriculum items, like using integers, we're instead going to be looking at large mathematical processes. My top 3 actually start with problem solving, then deduction and forward planning, and finally ending up with spatial reasoning.
So my top 3 start with money management. I've got geometry and manipulatives in there, and risk management, or just mental math, holding lots of different calculations in your mind at once.
One thing about this list is all of these games are wonderful games. I would have them in any collection. Where on the flip side of that, when you're looking at the sort of the classic math games you might be using in a regular classroom, something like integer chess, it's actually something that I've seen in every school I've been in. It is a horrible game.
And it sits on the shelf and it gathers dust and nobody wants to play it.
And so when we've been looking to pick a game, we've been trying to do ones that the students want to play, that the teachers want to present, but still have that core goodness to them.
And I have to say, sometimes a game starts with fun and you get your students into it, but by the end it ends with learning. And it's that process that I think is really important, that the teacher take their student on, where they go from, hey, let's just have a good game, but suddenly there's a lot of depth that we'll hopefully inform you about today.
And you may have noticed from our introduction, which was resistance themed, you might have thought that we were going to have a lot of deduction games in here, and I have to admit, when I first wrote the script, that was the plan. However, deduction games like Ultimate Werewolf, Coup, Resistance, I've used in the class, but I didn't want to put them on the list this time because I wanted to challenge myself. I wanted to pick games I haven't currently used that I still think are excellent. So let me just dive into it with my number 3.
But before he dives into his number 3, I have a little surprise today. This is the first game that I'm not going to talk about today. It's Cathedral, and it's a fun game. You're vying for position on the board. You're trying to remove the pieces. If you've ever played Go, similar to that, and it's fun, but it didn't make my list. Not educational enough. Squeeze another one in there. This is Rumus. This is the 3-dimensional version of Blockus. Both really fun games. It's terrible if you lose a piece. So again, this one did not make my list today.
Yeah, and losing a piece can really make a difference for an educational game because these are games that are going to have some wear and tear.
That's right.
Well, listen, why don't you just go with your number 3 since you seem to be on a roll.
I really think people would love to hear what you've got in store for them.
All right. Well, I decided to go for my number 3s with Euro-style games. This is a wonderful Euro-style game called Belfort. Euro-style games, you're building an economy and you're trying to make your sort of system work better over time. Here's the problem. Belfort is an extremely complicated game. It's 45 minutes of explanation. In the game, it can be 2 hours easily. While I think that if we had a group of core students who were really into games, this would be a great addition. It's actually not my number 3, so I got to add 1 or 2 myself. So for my number 3 is actually Takenoko. Much less management, but just a beautiful game. Still has some component loss issues, but wonderful game where you are feeding a panda bear, you're gardening, and there's all sorts of different ways to score that have slightly different math skills. You are pattern matching, you are resource managing, and it's just a wonderful game. Takenoko.
Anything that involves feeding a panda bear is good by me.
That's right. Let me give it my ratings. Easy to learn. Takenoko is probably an A-, and that's why I picked it, because it's something that's a little bit easier to learn. Its educational value, for younger grades, I would probably give it an A. For high school level grades, probably a B-, because sort of we might expect them to have those skills, but certainly it's one of those things where once the play starts, the education just starts flowing out of it. But for fun, Takenoko gets a solid A-. I'd say that this game, if it was 3/4 its length, would be a better game.
Okay.
What's your
Very strong ratings. My number 3 is a game called Acquire. You probably won't get your hands on this version of the game. This is from 1999 or 98. Beautiful components, but you can get the more recent version, 2008, I believe, probably about $30. Why I love this game, since Saxon created this game, 1964 is when it originally was created. As a child, I used to play Stock Ticker, probably some of you have, but that was just a random game of luck. You roll a die and you hope that your stocks break and you make some money. This game really focuses on buying low, selling high. It's real financial management. You've got your paper money so that students have to read charts in order to figure out when 2 chains merge, how much money do the people who sell their shares get. So there's all kinds of management that way. But much better game than Monopoly because it really simulates real world finances, and I think it's just a really fun game to play. Hard to learn.
This is a game that everybody talks about as being the classic game. It's been around forever, and it is still as popular now, I would say, as it was 30, 40 years ago.
Absolutely. Easy to learn, I would give it a B. Educational value, for me it would be an A, but I think for most students it would be a B+.
You think that little with all of the chart reading and managing money? I think you should bump it to an A.
I'm changing that. I'm going with an A. Thank you for convincing me.
Perfect.
And for fun, a lot of fun, I'm only going to give it a B+. Some students might be daunted just because it's a financial game.
All right. Now my second choice is about planning and deduction. Trying to decide what your opponent's going to do and also see the future for yourself. And this one didn't make it to number 2, but it's in the same same range. It's called Suro. There's another one called Suro of the Seas, which I've not played, but I think it's maybe a little more advanced if you get a group that really likes this. The idea is you're flying dragons around on the board and you want to prevent yourself from flying off the board while still making everyone else fly off the board. You have to be able to look at the patterns on the board, you have to think about what possible moves your opponent can make in order to keep themselves alive, and you have to decide with some strategy where do you want to be flying to on the board. It's a wonderful game, very easy to learn.
I love that this game's 15 to 20 minutes, 2 to 8 players, so lots of people and short time to play. It's perfect.
It also has my favorite component of all in it is a little piece of Japanese paper in there that is wonderful. But my actual number 2 is a game called Blueprints. In Blueprints, you are building little towers made out of dice, and depending on the color of the dice, they score in different ways. There's some dice rolling, there is some trying to keep certain colored dice from your opponents because you know that they're really looking for them. And there's also this very difficult decision as to whether or not you want to build to your blueprint or whether or not you want to break your blueprint and go for something else. And sometimes breaking your blueprint is good, but I think people can block it. For ease to learn, blueprints, it gets an A-. It's actually very simple to learn. Educational value, again, I'm going to have to do this in layers. I think for junior level students, I would give this a solid A. For high school students, I'd give it maybe an A-. It is mostly arithmetic, that the math that you're doing in this, but with all of that strategy, I'm positive there's a lot more learning that comes out of this. For fun, I give it an A-. This game is just great. I play it with my children all the time, and they would play it with me today. And so what's your number 2?
Excellent, thank you for those picks.
It picks our top 12.
This is my number 2, La Boca. Mr. Dunn introduced this to me. What I love about it's collaborative. There's problem solving, there's reflecting, there's connecting, there's communicating, there's reasoning, and these are all math processes that I think are valuable skills in learning, especially in context. About, well, in this case, geometry and spatial reasoning. So this is actually based on the Argentinian capital from Buenos Aires. If you Google it, you'll see the buildings look like these pieces here. And so you have 2 different sides, and you're attempting to recreate a picture that you get. So conceptualization sometimes can be difficult for students on this, but because they solve it together, I think it's great. And because there's manipulatives, as soon as they get their hands on the pieces, this game's a winner. So
just when they open up the box, they're already excited with La Boca. It sets up in half minute, and the cooperative element or the semi-cooperative element, because you're actually competing against each other, but you're playing together in turns. The semi-cooperative nature of it, they absolutely love. Oh, I get to play with Randy this time. Oh, that's exciting. Oh, I get to play with Johnny this time. Oh, that's great. You know. And
even when you're not playing, though, it's still fun to watch the others, and you're thinking through, how would I do this, and which piece would I be grabbing now?
And you're trying to solve the problem yourself.
Absolutely.
And
so,
because you're engaged right there, you're learning. And
yes,
that's why I was going to put this on my list, but you begged me to have it on your list, and I agree. It needed to be here.
Very kind. So I give this ease to learn, it's an A. I would give it educational value, a B-. I'm going to change that to a B. Actually, I give it a B. And for fun, B+.
Absolutely.
Good icebreaker.
Great game, great game. Actually, on that note, just talking about the manipulatives, this is not as much of a game as it is a puzzle. It's called Catamino. This is a great resource to have in your classroom where you're solving very much La Boca-like problems, but on a solo basis. And I would recommend every math department have Catamino. Throw out their internet chess and instead get a box of Catamino.
So, Mr. Dunn, do you have any games that help people learn how to count better?
You mean to 3, for
3,
example?
yes, would be great.
Well, actually I do. This didn't make my list, but No Thanks is a very simple game where cards are dealt out with these little chips, and when the card comes around, you can play a chip to avoid taking it. Every time you take a card, that gives you points, and the winner is the person with the least number of points. This has students with a little bit of strategy because straights score less than just the individual cards, and they can really make some strategy out of it. It's a wonderful game, great icebreaker as well, and has more cards than 3 in it.
Thank you for not talking about that game.
I didn't talk about it at all.
Okay, Mr. Dunn, let's hear your number 1 pick.
Well, I'm ready for that, but I remember how excited you were about your number 1 game, so why don't you shoot first?
Okay, you don't have to sell me. The main question that I think students ask in math class, never having taught one myself, but I'm just assuming here, is when am I going to use this in the real world?
Or is this going to be on the exam? But that's...
Or can I go to the bathroom?
Or can I go to the bathroom? That's right.
But to answer that question, I think you can bring a student to my number 1 pick and say there's about 10 different ways that math can be used to set a goal in this game and then to achieve success through meeting those objectives. So my top pick is Android Netrunner.
Solid game.
Simple rule, simple goal, you have to score 7 points, both sides. It's an asymmetrical game, which means that the runner has a different objective than the corporation. The runner's trying to break into a server to try and steal information. The corporation is trying to protect their servers using what's called ICE, which are protective barriers. And why I love this game is because it's an LCG, which is a living card game, where you build your deck of cards and you enter this game, but you have to have certain amounts of different kinds of cards in your deck. And so with Mr. Dunn, I would ask him, for instance, what would be the ideal number of ice to have in this deck so that I would have a 1 in 5 chance of pulling an ice every time. And of course, he's given me a great answer, which you'll have to check our Twitter account to find that. But this is a game where you're managing your money, you're managing clicks, which are your turns, and you're also looking at all the different modifiers to see if that guy can break into your server, and if he's going to do that, which server is he most likely to break into, and what ice can you use to protect that server. You can see how there's just all kinds of different modifiers, different values going on that you're juggling these calculations.
I've actually only played this once, but I was sitting there as the runner, looking at these barriers and thinking to myself, okay, I've got this many steps I can do, I've got this many coins to do this many actions, and then at the end, what am I going to be getting? And that whole bluffing element combined with the mathematical calculations makes this a very nice tense game. It's a lot of mental math, but it just ends up just keeping both players engaged all the time.
Yes, and it's math learned in an embedded context, which is so vital for students. This is one where they won't realize they're doing math until the end when you tell them.
That's right.
So, love it. Easy to learn. This one gets a C-. There is a learning curve. The basic game is not hard to learn, but the dynamics become very difficult later on.
I find with all living card games, this is just one of a large series of them, I find all living card games have these little fiddly rules to them. But once you understand the core mechanism, they do start to teach themselves. So once you understand the basics, well then if you come to a card you've never come to before, you can probably navigate it if you understand the basic concepts.
That's right. Richard Garfield created this game. He also did Magic, which many of your students will know. And the minute you tell them that this is his newer incarnation of that game and that he likes this one better, then I think you'll find that they'll be engaged. So
He hasn't made a bad game.
He has not. He's an excellent game designer. So easy to learn is a C-, education A-, and fun B+.
I agree completely. That's a wonderful choice. Now my number one, and surprisingly, I just got one for my number one, is Star Wars X-Wing, also by Fantasy Flight, the same group that made your number one. This is a wonderful game where students will be flying X-Wings and TIE fighters around on a board, making maneuvers, and in the end, why I picked this one is I've used this in a math class, and I've seen students learn spatial reasoning from this, getting their left and rights, while in the tense situation of dog fighting with another spaceship, trying not to crash into an asteroid, figuring out the scale of their maneuvers. It's all done by templates and you play on an actual surface. I've also had students who've struggled with spatial reasoning continually fly off the edge of the board and evolve their understanding until later on that they weren't. For ease to learn, I'd give this game a B-. Most Fantasy Flight games have some little tricks and twists to them. This one is no different. Educational value. The educational value might be a little pasted on this one. And I feel bad having this as my number one, and I'm giving it an educational value of B-, but that spatial reasoning is great. Why this one made my number one is, for fun, I give it a pew pew, I give it a red 5 standing by, and I also give it a leave them to me. And because of that, the fact that you will be having a little laser thing that you can change into green or red lasers, depending on whether or not you're a good guy or a bad guy, this is every person who plays this loves this game.
This is not the game that you are looking for. This is actually the game you're looking for. Wings of War, now called Wings of Glory. It's almost the same game. For the fantasy nerds, this would be the option. For the history buffs, this would be the game you'd want to go for. And you get all the little models with the different types of planes, and I think you could do a great research project based on the different types of planes. But this isn't our history episode, this is our math episode, so back to you.
They are the same game. At any rate, the Star Wars X-Wing, I think, is the game to have. It does have an issue, though. It has lots of little tiny components, and I'd be very worried about students stealing those, or maybe not stealing those, but playing with them really aggressively and breaking them and losing them.
Attempting to fly them across the room.
Attempting to fly them across the room. I actually thought about it, and I realized you could actually play this without the miniatures in a group that you maybe were worried about that with, and they can actually play with just the bases, and the game would work 100% just as well. And that's the conclusion of our math episode.
Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, if you haven't checked out our English episode, there it is.
And our geography episode is coming up next.
Don't forget to like us on Facebook.
And follow us on Twitter.
Oh, and remember,
TG rules! Yum, yum, yum.
You know what I am going to say? Good work.
Oh, perfect, thank you. My number 2 is actually, oh, fabulous. Focusing in. Alright, no, we're not. We're totally not. Alright, just a second. I think that's good. This is cut. This has been cut for a while now. Alright. That's nice. Where are we cutting it now? Awesome. Alright, this is gonna get rude very quickly. That's just how I was going with that.
But that's
No, I was going somewhere else.
down.
Oh,